Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to go over the exercise on omitted variables. If you haven't attempted it already, I recommend you do so, and then watch the video. To start out, we're going to run a regression of GPA on skipped. We'll go to the Analysis Tool Pack, run a regression, select as our Y range, college GPA, and X range is going to be number of classes skipped. Click Labels and run the regression. Let's look at our results. Our baseline here is 3.15. That would tell us that our prediction for GPA if you skip 0 classes is 3.15, and the more classes you skip, the lower that predicted GPA is going to go. In the first question, I asked you to think about some omitted variables here. I hope you've written those down, and you can then compare them with some of the things that I'll talk about now. There's no one right answer here. The main idea here is that we want to think about variables that might contribute to GPA that are also correlated with skipped. And we need to have both of those components for omitted variables to cause a problem. One example might be number of hours worked in a job. People who spend a lot of time working are going to have less time to study, which might have a negative impact on their GPA, but it might also make them more likely to skip class if they suddenly have to work or that's caused a disruption in their schedule. Another variable might be how interested they are in their classes. People who are more interested in their classes are going to naturally put in more effort and get a higher GPA, but they would also be likely to skip less as well. So that's the main idea here, finding variables that are correlated with both GPA and skipped. That's what omitted variables is all about. The problem specifically called out intelligence as a possible omitted variable as well. Let's think about what the omitted variable bias might be. The first step is to think about how intelligence is correlated with our dependent variable, GPA, and our explanatory variable, skipped. GPA is pretty easy. People who are more intelligent probably have higher GPAs on average. Not saying that everybody with a higher intelligence is going to have a higher GPA, but there's a positive correlation. Next, how is intelligence correlated with skipped? Are people who are more intelligent more likely to skip or less likely to skip? This is a little trickier, but if we think about it ceteris paribus, people who are more intelligent might feel like they don't need to put as much effort into class and would be more likely to skip. Again, I'm not saying that every intelligent person is going to skip class all the time, just on average, this is a reasonable conjecture to make. So we have an omitted variable, intelligence, that is positively correlated with GPA and also positively correlated with skipped. A positive times a positive is a positive. That means the sign of our bias is positive. That means that this estimate right here is going to be biased upward. It's a little bit tricky here because this is a negative estimate, and so when we say that we have overestimated this parameter, it's actually less negative than it should be because of this omitted variable. This means that our positive bias has actually led us to estimate an effect of skipping that might not be as strong as it truly is, because the people who skip tend to also be smart. Next, we're going to add ACT into the regression. We'll keep the Y range the same, but for the X range, we're going to take skipped and ACT. We'll take a look at these results. First, look at the coefficient estimate for ACT. This is positive. Let's think about what this means. Do we actually think that this is a causal effect here? That higher ACT scores cause your college GPA to be higher? Well, that's probably not true. But what ACT is doing here is acting as a proxy. One thing ACT might be proxying for is intelligence. People who are smart tend to have higher ACT scores. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's standing in for it. Let's look now at what happened to the skipped coefficient. We'll go back to the original regression. We can see that it was about negative 0.09, and it has now changed to about negative 0.1. The effect looks stronger than it used to. It's gotten more negative. And this should make sense given our previous discussion about signing the bias due to intelligence. We didn't add intelligence into the equation, but we did add a proxy, and that removed a positive bias from our estimate, and so our estimate became more negative than it used to. So this should make sense given what we conjectured earlier. We're now going to add one last variable, high school GPA, into the regression. We'll take a look at these results, and we can see that there is a positive correlation between high school GPA and college GPA. Again, this is not causal. High school GPA is acting as a proxy. Having a high school GPA tends to predict higher college GPA, but it doesn't have an actual causal impact. High school GPA might proxy for a lot of different things, but one of them might be how good a student you are, things like study habits and test preparation and that kind of thing. And what we can see has happened to our estimate for skipped. It has actually gone the opposite way now. It's become less negative. Numerically, it went up. We can think through this by thinking about how study habits, which are being proxied for by high school GPA, are correlated with skipped and college GPA. People with good study habits have a higher GPA. They also probably skip less. So that's a positive correlation and a negative correlation, which combine to give us a negative bias. And by putting high school GPA in, we are removing the negative bias, which is going to make our estimate go up. And so you can see, comparing the previous regression, it went from negative 0.1 to negative 0.08. That is a positive change because we've removed a negative bias. The main thing that I want you to get out of this problem is thinking through what we see in a regression. Regression is not all just numbers. You have to understand what's going on in the background and get the right interpretation of the regression. Otherwise, it doesn't really mean anything. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks for watching.